Here with Janene from the Indian Collective. First, can you just kind of describe not only your organization, but it kind of just seems like there's a collection of not only people, but orgs across a few nations. So if you could just kind of give us an overview of the orgs that you're working with, and then we can kind of get into how you ended up here.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I'm Janene Yazzie. I'm Navajo, or Dene, and I'm with an organization called Indian Collective. We are the largest Indigenous-led movement-based organization in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And we operate under a very simple mission that to support the self-determination of Indigenous peoples and to build collective power for effective climate change solutions and for building alternative models for the economy and new systems to achieve justice and equity.
You had mentioned that the org spans between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The people that you've brought out to these protests, are they like local, or are some able to travel, but also connectivity to the outside issues?
Well, the reason why we operate across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico is because our Indigenous peoples have had a history of having relationships across the Americas pre-colonial boundaries and borders. And many of the conditions that we fight remain the same. We are fighting settler colonial institutions of imperialism that are rooted in white supremacy and heteropatriarchy. And we've traveled here from our many different communities and front lines to be here at the DNC, standing with the people who are marching against the DNC, because we know not only the connectedness of our issues, but also the root causes and the history that has led to the structure of a system in which has been so unequal. The reason why we felt it was important to be here is because there's been a continued erasure and invisibility of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous resistance in the Americas. And with what's happening in Palestine, it is vital and moral for us. It's our ethical and moral responsibility to stand in solidarity and to help organize against that manifestation of settler colonialism and U.S. imperialism that is currently the foundation for the genocide that is going on in Palestine. And it's important to bring this message of land back into Indigenous hands to this convention and beyond, because we know that systemic change, structural change that we're advocating for, doesn't begin and end at a ballot box. We know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have a lot more in common and in history with each other. They're in much more alignment with each other policy-wise than they are different. And we've seen that as Indigenous peoples, that's been the nature of this two-party, quote-unquote, democratic system. And so we're here to stand in solidarity with everyone because we know the pathway forward for a true democracy, a multiracial democracy, lies in land back and in Black reparations as a starting point. And we want to continue to remind people that we're organizers, that the power comes from the people, the power comes from the ground up, that we must build relationship, be in right relationship with each other, and continue to build collective power regardless of the outcomes of the election.
Now, I've been aware of there's some wins recently in Oklahoma and actually getting the authority over territory. Can you speak to any of that?
This has been some recent wins that have come from longstanding organizing and strategy development among Indigenous peoples on many different front lines. We're dealing with a government and institutions that were built off of legitimizing the theft of lands, territories, and resources from Indigenous peoples, and those are conditions that continue today. And so some of the recent wins have really been enabled because of that longstanding organizing and people working both within and outside the system. But we know that it's just a very small starting point. A lot of those wins aren't necessarily complete return of lands into Indigenous authorities and self-determination. Some of them are co-management models, and so we want to continue to push to move beyond that because we've seen and we know in our work repatriating wealth and resources back to Indigenous peoples and frontline organizations that when Indigenous peoples undertake a project to restore their relationship with their land, it leads to more sustainable regenerative economies. It leads to more effective climate change solutions for adaptation and mitigation. It leads to more robust and healthy and sustainable sustainable food systems. And so we know this is why we operate off of a theory of change, that when you support the self-determination of Indigenous peoples, it leads to the best outcomes for all peoples and planet. And a part of our resistance is not just fighting against and being responsive to a lot of the existential threats that we're facing, both within the political system and climate change, but of building together, coming together to put in the work, to create the solutions that are needed, to stand in solidarity with each other, to recognize all of the ways that we've been taught to be divided and to see each other as advocating for different things, and go back to the basis of our humanity, which is that we are all dependent on this earth. We're all dependent on each other. The safety and security of our communities is tied up in each other and not in these institutions. And that we have to fight in all of the ways that we are called to fight for the systemic change that we all need and deserve.
So you mentioned that you're the policy director. Could you just talk about some of the work that you do, and also like how it kind of happens?
Absolutely. Well, being a movement-based organization, we have to constantly be aware of all of the different ways our communities are battling to enact their solutions, to address systemic issues that they're facing at the local and the national level and the international level. And so at the local level, not only do we find different ways to resource and build power, but that's where we like to emphasize is the real power of the vote is in local elections, and in finding those opportunities to disrupt entrenched power dynamics in our communities. So that we can start to create safer communities and create more effective policy solutions from the local level on up. At the national level and the federal level, we engage in trying to push party agendas to be more in alignment with the values and the principles that we're fighting for. And that's where we bring a lot of our more national policy advocacy and national movement issues. So at the federal level, what we're really pushing is for the release of the longest living Indigenous political prisoner, Leonard Peltier, which right now can only happen through executive clemency because he was recently denied parole again. And so that's one of our main priorities here, because he's running out of time and we don't want him to be another political prisoner that is wrongfully incarcerated and that loses their life before achieving justice. And so in that way, we see and stand in solidarity with all political prisoners and against the policies that are enacted at the national level and at the state level that is increasing criminalization and surveillance of social justice movements or anyone considered against the current U.S. agenda, which is very imperialistic and very controversial in this moment, because we're witnessing the architecture and the support of a genocide in real time. And so I think for us, it's been a really important moment to stand in solidarity with Palestine, to continue to push for a permanent ceasefire, and to end to all resources and aid to Israel, because many of our communities here domestically are the backbone of the military-industrial complex. They're places that were set up initially as prisoner of war camps, as military bases. These military bases now are expanding and are seeing increased investments in critical areas across the United States that Indigenous peoples are witnessing in real time. And so we know that our exploitation and our systemic oppression under this country is connected to these imperialist agendas that are being carried out in other places, and that being in solidarity is very important. But that's also why we have to advocate at the international level as well. Indigenous peoples have a history of having our treaty rights, which are the foundation of this country's democracy, being violated and unfulfilled. And so the Indigenous rights movement has for a very long time exhausted all domestic remedies and has sought advocacy at international level through UN mechanisms and through larger regional institutions like the Organization of the Americas to develop the frameworks that we need to protect our rights as Indigenous peoples, which includes not only human rights, but our collective rights, our spiritual rights, our rights to protect and preserve our language systems, our worldviews, because that is the foundation from our experience and from what we know to be true, having resisted these colonial institutions from the onset. That is the foundation that we need to create the alternative models of governance, of economics, of relationship, and of community building. And that's why we fight so hard for our rights.
If anybody wants to help out with your organizations and any of the efforts, where are some places they can go?
We encourage people to come join us on our website and on our social media channels, on our YouTube channel. It's all and they're all under NDN Collective. It doesn't stand for anything. It's us reclaiming slang, right?
Right.
We've been called Indians by the colonizers, and so in our communities that got shortened to Indian, and we're reclaiming that. So it's Indian Collective. Yeah.
Word. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.